Welcome to Blueprints for Liberty, Designing the Freedom Cities of Tomorrow. This is a podcast that explores the visionary concept of freedom cities and how we can create living environments that prioritize individual liberty, social harmony, and equal opportunities for all. We look back through history to see how the past informs the future and how people can self-organize in their communities to support self-sufficiency. We also look to develop leaders that are moral and ethical in a world that is spinning out of control. Tune in to be part of the conversation shaping the future of our communities.
Hello and welcome, everyone. Today we have a special guest. Her name is Genevieve Piturro, and she has written a book. I'll let her share a little bit about that book and who she is. We're going to be talking today about leadership, our favorite topic, and kind of what her vision of the future looks like and what role she believes leadership plays in guiding us, toward her vision of a better world, because I think that's what leadership is all about, is making sure that we empower individuals to explore their genius and bring their talents to the world in a way that is meaningful to themselves and to those around them. So, Genevieve, you're on.
Hi, Cheryl. Thank you for this invitation, and I couldn't agree more with what leadership is.
Well, thank you. So I noticed you have a book. You want us to tell a little bit about your book and who you are?
Sure. My first book is Purpose, Passion, and Pajamas: How to Transform Your Life, Embrace the Human Connection, and Lead with Meaning. And it is the story and the lessons, I call them Heart of the Matter lessons, that I discovered along my journey from the time I jumped off the corporate ladder when I heard an inner voice ask me, if this is the next 30 years of your life, is this enough? To starting Pajama Program and running it as the executive director for 20 years, passing the baton, and now teaching how to be a voice that moves the world.
I like that. One thing that you said that I think kind of resonated with me was, talking about connection and how important connection is to making that happen. So you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. I never thought about the human connection. And as I was climbing the corporate ladder, it really was about me, what I could do to get ahead, making my boss happy. Yes, being a team player, but the emphasis was really making my boss happy because he had the control to promote me, right? And my reputation to climb that corporate ladder depended on how much I could deliver. And that was such a busy, crazy workaholic life. I never stopped to think about what I wanted to do because from a young age, I wanted to be in the TV business. I used to watch Mary Tyler Moore's show, and her character, Mary Richards, was my idol. So I was doing that 13 years until, alone in my apartment, I heard an inner voice for the first time ever, heard a quiet voice in me ask me, if this is the next 30 years of your life, is this enough? And I realized that I had been climbing so fast and so furiously that a lot of the ideas and dreams that I didn't follow could have been precious ones I missed, like having a family and having children. So I thought, how could I bring children into my life? And I started volunteering to read to children who were in emergency shelters, who were taken out of a dangerous situation by police and social workers for safety, and to try to find a better place for them to grow up and try to solve some of the issues in their lives as such young children. And I found my heart, and I found that once I was brave enough to share my story of the life I thought I wanted and the life my heart was pointing me toward, before I knew what was happening, people were supporting what I was doing and feeling the same hole in their heart that I realized I had. And that power of human connection was just so overpowering. And it's what really helped grow Pajama Program from one little idea to a movement. And it's all about the human connection. Once you're on purpose, once you discover your purpose, your responsibility is to share it. And you will discover for yourself the power of the human connection.
Yes, that once again, like I said, really resonates. I'm part of a program that's called Gene Keys. A lot of people aren't really familiar with it, but that's not really the point. But there's 3 questions they ask, and I think these questions align well with what you just explained is like, what is your purpose? What is your vision? What do you want to do? But then the second question was one that kind of stumped me when I first heard it was, who do you want to do it with? And I thought, oh, that's interesting. Okay, why would that matter? And then, how do you take what your purpose and your vision is, and from there, serve the greater whole? And just like when I first got into, my career, and I've started off as an instructional designer, and that's pretty much what I did, but I've written a ton of leadership programs and also participated in a lot of leadership programs. And the one thing I found consistent across the board was that we all get into it for what's in it for me. What am I trying to accomplish? And then we try to align ourselves with people who we feel will help us accomplish our goals and, help us rise up that ladder of success. Where when I started finding more happiness in my life is when I kind of flipped that script, and it was like, well, what do I really want to do? And one of the examples that was given in this Gene Keys program that I told you about was, let's say, for example, you wanted to play the piano and your life's mission was you wanted to play the piano. Well, you didn't feel like you could make a career out of it. Who's going to pay you unless you're like a super well-known concert pianist to do that? Well, rather than focus on that, maybe you have a job and that job pays enough money for you to pay for piano lessons, and you take an hour or 2 out of your day to practice the piano every day, and that's great. So you're finding meaning and purpose in what you're doing, but it isn't necessarily, where your money is coming from. But then who do you want to do it with? And that's that connection. That's that human connection. Once, you say you want to be a pianist, well, now I want to share that with other people. And I want it, I want to get together with other people who like to make music. And, they may play the same instrument, they may sing, they may play other instruments. And together you create music. And then when you create that music, you want to share that music with other people, and you want to bless the lives of other people with the music that you make. And whether you choose to
Absolutely.
do that in a way that, if you're trying to make it a career, then you're constantly out looking for people who can help you monetize whatever, you're trying to accomplish. But then that doesn't always work unless you've got some great connections in Hollywood or something.
Mhm.
But you can't, because once again, you're looking at it not from what can I contribute, but more from how can I, take what I'm doing and monetize it. And I think we live in a world where that seems to be the primary focus. So I really like what you're saying, you know, building that connection when you got into, working with these students, it wasn't about you. It was about them. And once it became about them, then it started providing that meaning and purpose. So I really like, I liked what you shared there. Could you tell us a little bit more?
Sure, it was about these children. It was about the hole they felt in their heart, not feeling attached, belonging, part of anyone, any family that cared for them. And I was blessed with a family that cared for me. And I just wanted to wrap my arms around them all. And the way I did it was I would read to them at night, and they were just so traumatized from where they had been removed, and they were in a safe space, but they didn't know what was going to happen to them tomorrow. So my stories were intended to give them a little peace and, little love. And when I saw where they were going to sleep after my story time, they were sleeping in their clothes, and I brought pajamas. And one little girl was so afraid of me. She didn't say anything all night. She was just, they were all in clothes they'd been wearing for too long and it didn't fit them. And they were squirming around in their little cots and futons, not comfortable. And I brought pajamas. And this little girl just looked at me and she asked me, "What are pajamas?" And I just felt that there was something I could give, but I had no idea the enormity of the situation around the US, never mind just around in my town. And I also equally didn't understand how many people, as I mentioned, would want to help. This little idea, this little act by bringing pajamas to them just touched everyone, because when I told them the story of this little girl, they felt what I felt. We can fix this. We can do something. And it was just something that happened organically, because I think in our hearts we want to make a difference. We want to help. We want, because it makes us feel part of the enormity of the universe and the world, where I think so often we feel alone ourselves.
Yeah, we do. It's funny, we live in a world filled with so many people, and obviously many people live in urban areas because they congregate in these urban areas. So people who live in rural areas, where like I live in a very rural area and I have lots of space, just kind of spread out kind of thing. But people are like, well, I can't see any of my neighbors' houses from where I live. We all have large, property area, and we all kind of like it that way. My
Mhm.
husband goes out and walks the dog every morning, though, and everybody else is out walking their dogs. So, I feel like we have a good connection with our neighbors, and we know them, and we have that community, that sense of community. But yet people sometimes who live in urban areas, they have tons of people around them, but yet they still feel so alone. I mean, they practically bump into people as they're walking down the street, and yet there's not that connection. And I've noticed, because I've lived in plenty of cities in my life too, is when people oftentimes live in cities and they're walking down the street, they're always looking, especially if we have phones nowadays, we're always looking down. And I was listening to an interview of, I don't know how many people know Russell Brand, but he was being interviewed, and the person interviewing him said, that he was walking with Russell Brand as he was walking down the street. And as he was walking down the street, he noticed that Russell Brand wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't looking down. He was making eye contact with people that he didn't even know, that he was just, and just smiling and just saying hello. I think oftentimes we minimize the impact, because I think about times in my life I've traveled through many airports. I used to be a flight attendant many years ago. And I noticed when people would just look at me and smile, I may be having a bad day, but that simple little smile meant something. And I think that's where it kind of goes back to what you're talking about, is once we get outside of ourselves. And part of my harmonic leadership program that I've put together is servant leadership. It's about serving the whole. It's about, we don't go into it with the idea, what am I going to get out of it? It's like, what can I contribute? And as we do that, I think that's where we find our purpose, when we are so focused on ourselves and how we can achieve our own goals. I think oftentimes we then lose that purpose because we are so self-absorbed and we're so focused on looking down or looking at our phones, that we're missing, the beauty of kind of the world around us. So
Yes, you're right. Right. It's so true. I do know who Russell Brand is. He did a remake of Arthur, among
yeah.
other.
Mhm.
Yeah.
He's rather interesting and very
Yes.
energetic. So yeah, I like this idea of, my harmonic leadership program has kind of a quiet leadership, servant leadership, and conscious leadership. And I think people always ask me, what is conscious leadership? Most people kind of can identify quiet leadership, servant leadership kind of thing, but what is conscious leadership? And conscious leadership really is being more, we think of being conscious as being kind of once again, an internal thing. Am I conscious? Am I aware? Am I awake?
Right. Right.
All different kinds of levels of consciousness. But really, it's not just being aware of what's happening inside of me. It's far more about being aware of what's happening outside of me and how I can connect, energetically, I guess, on a level where, the energy, even if I'm not saying or doing anything, is my energy bringing a positive, not a fan of this word, but a positive vibe, to the environment around me.
Right. Right. No, you're right. It's looking outside ourselves. It's the bigger picture of community And I think we're getting there because we've been through and still going through, not a very stable or peaceful time. And I think we're looking to each other to hold hands, to look into each other's eyes and say, okay, I got you. Okay, you feel this? Okay, let's team up here. Let's spread a little bit of something good. Share with me, I'll share with you. And I think we're looking for that connection, especially after COVID, and I think it's one of the good things that came out of it. We just have to keep it growing.
I agree. And I think, it doesn't matter to me which side of the political spectrum that we're on, both sides, and it's unfortunate, it truly is. But I think politics, by its very nature, wants to divide people. So we can put them into different groups and then we can cater to this group or this group, depending on, what demographic we're trying to get to vote for us or whatever. But unfortunately, that dynamic has made us believe that we're all really different and that we all, need to identify with whatever particular group we identify with. And in my research, especially the last couple of years, I mean, I think we all know this at our core. I don't think this isn't any great revelation, but what unites us, I think, is far more powerful than what should divide us. And, as we take the time to interact with people on a human level, people, I have to tell this story. This is very interesting. In our church, we have a program where we, and most churches have this, but, we go around and visit people in our congregation or community. And sometimes we're assigned to do it. Sometimes we just spontaneously do it. But I was assigned in this particular situation to go visit this person. And I was a young mother and I was struggling financially. Life was kind of difficult. And I got assigned to go visit this woman who clearly lived in a very wealthy neighborhood, very nice neighborhood. You know, I came from more of a, I don't know what you want to call it, middle class background and, played sports and those types of things and never really got into the whole, I don't know, when I first went to visit her, she started talking about her bridge club and, her community club that she went to. And I'm just sitting there thinking, I don't have anything in common with this person. How am I ever going to connect? We're just worlds apart. And then all of a sudden she started talking, her dog, I remember, her dog came in and I could tell how much her dog was her world. And I was like, oh my gosh, we have a connection. I love dogs, I love animals. So that was kind of the opening. And then she was telling me that, sharing with me some of the struggles she was having with her daughter. And her daughter was a teenager. And I was young enough that I'd just come through those teenage years. And I wouldn't say I was a rebellious child, but I certainly was hard-headed and stubborn and, pushed against my parents at times and things like that. And so I could kind of relate to her, what her situation, because now I was a mother, but I'd also just recently been one of those teenagers. And so, and it just built this lifelong friendship. And so I just think once we open up and we kind of take our blinders off and say, okay, so what if you live in this nice, rich neighborhood and I'm just this young mother struggling to get off the ground financially and those types of things, you know, we, we almost always find something that connects us, that binds us together.
Oh, yes, it does. Absolutely binds us together. That was a perfect example. And so many things that we learned and that we went through as a young child are still in our hearts, and the good as well as the not so good.
Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, there are many people in this world who, you mentioned that you came, you felt like you grew up in a good situation, and I did too. Very much so. I wasn't, like I said, it was very much a middle class family. I wouldn't say financially we were rich or anything like that, but I never ever felt deprived, ever. I never lacked for any I never wondered where my next meal was coming from.
Right, right.
Always had a very comfortable bed to sleep in, a warm place to come home to, a family who, like I said, I wouldn't say I was a rebellious teenager, but I certainly gave my parents their share of grief. But I always knew my parents loved me. That was never in doubt. And I just think that so many people in this world, for whatever reason, are just really struggling to have that kind of foundation. And, I think that really helps to ground you and helps, create your identity. So, and the other thing that I think we live in a world of very crisis situation is, and I do think social media plays a big role in this, is kids just don't have an identity anymore. They don't really know who they are. They don't know what they stand for. They don't. And so they go to social media and they get these ridiculous ideals of, because everybody, when you post on social media, you're not going to, post some people will, but what a bad day you have, or how terrible. You're not going to take a picture of yourself in your worst moments and post it on social media unless, you're trying to, make a point. But you look at all these, and even growing up before social media, the magazines, you get Teen Magazine, you get Vogue Magazine, you get all these things that portray an image that just isn't real. And so I think this is created a crisis of identity. We feel like we can't live up to this perfection. And I think part of leadership is helping people find their identity, helping them find who they really are and be okay, not just okay, but happy with who they are, and identify that genius. It doesn't matter what you look like. It doesn't matter how well dressed you are. It doesn't matter, what your background is, but just really embracing who you are.
It sounds like it should be easier than it is.
Yeah, exactly.
But hopefully, if more of us are sharing our hearts and are speaking out and sharing the hard times and the challenges, and not making it sound like, oh, all you have to do is what you feel like doing and follow your heart and everything is bliss. I wish it was. It ends up being the best thing you ever done, but it's scary. It's challenging, and the only way we can do that is to support each other.
It is. And it's interesting because, you brought up something there that I think is really important, is to share our struggles. But on that note, because I've had some real interesting challenges in my life, even though I, had a good, strong foundation growing up. I certainly made some choices that led me down some paths that weren't very productive in my life. But I'm always reluctant to share those stories until I'm on the other side and I feel like I've mastered them and I've moved on and I have something good to share. And when I was going through some really difficult things, what I found most helpful was not to hear people's quote success stories. I mean, that was nice and I wanted to hear those because it gave me some sense of, okay, there's hope. I can, if they struggled through all this and survived, I can do the same thing. But people sharing their stories when they're in the middle of it, when it's just a mess, when you don't feel good, you don't have the, oh, I rose above this and I'm all better now and, everything's great, is right now it's just a mess. I feel terrible. I look terrible. Whatever, And I actually found a lot of those stories to be quite comforting, just knowing that I wasn't the only person that was going through some difficult things. And I think often as leaders, once again, we think of these leaders as people who've risen above, who don't have these challenges, or, they've overcome them. And sometimes when you're in the middle of it, you don't necessarily want to hear how everybody's succeeding. You just want somebody to put their arm around you and say, hey, and one of the best, Brene Brown, she's another one that I love, but she was talking about empathy. And I always shared this story. I taught some classes for people with mental health issues and their families, especially their families. And she says, empathy is not when, somebody's like down in the hole and you're up in the top, saying, hey, look, I'm up here. Let me give you a ladder to get out of here. And here, I'll throw some food down to you. I said, no, what empathy is, if you're going to put the ladder down in that hole, you're going to climb down that ladder and you're just going to sit with that person in the bottom of the hole. And I thought, yes,
That's right. That's right.
that's what leaders are. They're willing to get down in that hole with you.
They are, and they get down first.
And, going back to your story about, these kids that you're working with and providing pajamas for them, I can't say because I wasn't there, but I think a lot of what you're doing is the same thing. You're getting down in the hole with them. You're coming down to their level. You're coming down to their experience and saying, I want to live with you in this space for right now. And if we're going to come out of this hole, we're going to come out of it together.
Right, that you're not alone. You're not
Mhm.
alone. I'm right here.
Yeah. And I think oftentimes as leaders, we don't want to get down in the hole with people. We think, oh, we want to help, let's send our ladders down there and they can climb up themselves. Well, unfortunately, sometimes even if you put a ladder down there, people don't know how to climb the ladder, or they're too weak. Maybe they've just been down there so long that they don't have the strength to climb that ladder. Sometimes you need to just go down there with them and help them gain the strength they need. And that's where that goes back to that connection that you're talking about. That's where those connections are made, is when you're down in the hole together.
That's when you bare your soul. That's when you're looking at a major decision, a crossroads, and fear's there. Yeah, and you have to take a chance on somebody else.
So tell me a little bit more about your book and, without, no spoiler alerts or whatever, but just, what's kind of your basic philosophy? Why did you write the book and what's the idea behind it?
Well, I wanted to, people often asked over the course of 20 plus years as the founder and executive director of Pajama Program, how I was able to make a change, a dramatic change, and how I could start something from nothing. And a lot of people have that hidden desire. They want not necessarily to start a nonprofit, but maybe realize halfway through their career it wasn't really their choice, that now they've realized what they really want to do. And it's challenging and daunting to think about making that switch. So I wanted, over the years, talking to people and speaking, I wanted to write down not just the things I did right, but the things I did wrong and the challenges, because I felt very responsible to be transparent and to show people, yes, we are here. Everything worked out beautifully, but it wasn't always easy. And, part of that is because I had gone halfway through my career doing one thing, and now, I wasn't 18. I didn't feel like I had a lot of time to make any mistakes. I was trying something new that could have been a bomb. And so I include in the journey in my book the things I did wrong, the things I did right, the things that scared me, how I found my moxie, how I learned the number one lesson, which is, we were talking about the human connection. And the lesson I learned is it's not the power of one that changes things. It's the power of one another that moves mountains and moves people. And until that light bulb went off and I saw that, I was never going to get anywhere by myself. I tell people I would have been like Santa Claus with a sack of pajamas over my shoulder. And that's all I could have done by myself. But when I realized that there was strength in sharing the story and in being vulnerable, because I cry all the time telling that story. When I think about it, like yesterday, that little girl, and the stories since of what the children have been through, the stories that the adults who are supporters, tell me the reasons that they joined up to help us, what those reasons are. They're all emotional, they're all vulnerable, they're all putting their heart on their sleeve. And until I learned that lesson about the power of one another, I couldn't help these children the way I wanted to. So the book is full of the details, good and bad, ups and downs. And at the end of every chapter is heart of the matter lessons that I learned pertaining to what I discussed in the chapter.
I like that. Yeah, I definitely like that. And I think, kind of on a final note here, I think the world that we live in, and COVID was to me kind of the pinnacle of it. But even moving into COVID, I think, the pendulum was swinging more toward, everybody living kind of autonomously and on your own. And, you know, I always laugh because unfortunately, I think we've all experienced the joy of driving in traffic, especially during rush hour when everybody's on their way to work. And here we are in our car by ourselves with our headphones on, and there's thousands of other cars around us all going the same direction, but none of us are going to the same place and none of us are connecting. And, even once we get to work, oftentimes it's like, okay, well, I walked in the door and now I've got this to do and this to do. And we sit at our desk and we put our headphones on. I love headphones, but I think in a way they were kind of one of the worst things that were ever invented. But I remember too, I was living in Houston, and I'm not a lover of the heat by any stretch of the imagination. And it was the middle of the summer. It was very hot and the power went out. And it went out for like 3 days in our apartment complex that I was living in. And I did not know one single neighbor in my apartment complex until the power went out. And when the power went out, everybody was sitting outside or by the pool, doing everything they could to try to cool off because it was so hot. And we were all miserable together. And it was miserable. I still remember how miserable it was. But at least we were miserable together, you know? And I got to know my neighbors. And I think the pendulum is starting to swing. And I think like you said, that COVID was kind of the pinnacle of that, where we were forced to isolate. And then once everybody was like, I'm not sure this is such a good idea. Maybe we need to rethink things a little bit and start to make that pendulum swing back the other direction to where we do have more human connection. And to me, you can share your thoughts on this as we close out here, is that the hallmark of a good leader is being able to create that connection with, not even if you're a boss at work, if you're as a parent, as just friends, peers, people in your community, if you serve in your church, your sports, whatever you're doing, just creating that connection puts you in a position to be a great leader.
Yes, I think that's very true. I think we all get there from different paths, right? We've all started in a very different place. There's nobody that started in the same exact place. And I think it would be wonderful if we all ended in the same place or side by side with the same purpose, or not the same purpose, but the same intent. And then we could just say, okay, thank you very much, life. I hope I was able to make an impact and, live purposefully.
Yes. And I think that's, like I said, we don't start at the same place. And for whatever practical reasons, I don't think we're going to end in the same place. And that's okay, because, I share with people that I'm a religious person, and I kind of go back to the 10 Commandments, that one of the 10 Commandments is thou shalt not covet. And I think it's a very overlooked commandment, because I've learned in my life, I'm not independently wealthy. I don't live in a great big huge house or anything, and I don't want to, but somebody else may want to, and maybe they want to live in a big house for whatever reasons they want to live in a big house. They may have 10 kids. I only had 4, and it doesn't even really matter how many kids you have. I mean, they may want a boat because they like to go out boating, and they want a big yacht to go out on the ocean or whatever. And I'm like, well, that looks nice. And it might sound like I might want that, but that's not really what I want. I would rather have this little tiny cabin in the woods, up in the mountains, because I love the mountains. And I think that's the beauty behind all of us, is that when we start appreciating, and, another, I think, great hallmark of leaders is helping people to be grateful for what they have, and realize that what they have, or at least what they're working toward, doesn't have to be equal to or the same as someone else. It's our own unique identity that makes us special and gives us that genius. So rather than coveting what other people have, appreciating what we do have and working toward what we as an individual want, and as leaders, helping people achieve their own individual goals. So that even though we don't start off at the same place, we don't end up at the same place, we hopefully all end up at a place where we feel good about who we are and
Right.
what we have in our life.
Right. I agree.
So, well, thank you for taking your time. You want to share your contact information and where they can get your book and that information with our audience?
Sure, sure. My website is my name, Genevieve Piturro, and you can email me at Gen at GenevievePiturro.com. And my book is available wherever you buy your books, Amazon, if it's the easiest. And it's called Purpose, Passion, and Pajamas, and is on the website. And I'd love to hear from anyone who wants to brainstorm what they feel their real purpose is and where they are in life. I'm happy to do a complimentary hour with anyone who wants to who needs a sounding board and share some personal changes that are maybe on the horizon.
Oh, thank you. I'm sure our audience will appreciate that. And all that information will be included in the show notes, so it's easily accessible. And I encourage you to reach out to her and let's create some more connections.
Thank you. Thank you, Cheryl.
All right. Thank you.